I never thought a single message could make my hands shake the way they did that morning. It was early. The sun had just started brushing through the curtains, and I was sipping my second cup of tea when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The screen lit up with a message from Matthew, my only child. I smiled as I picked it up, expecting a sweet update from their trip prep, or maybe a reminder about something Emily needed me to check at the house. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us, but instead, the words that blinked up at me changed everything. You won't be joining us on the family cruise. My wife would prefer to keep it just family. At first, I thought I'd misread it. I blinked. I reread, then read it again. But the words didn't change. My hands tightened around the phone, and I could feel the porcelain cup wobble slightly in my other hand. I set it down carefully, not trusting myself to hold on to anything fragile in that moment. Just family. What did that make me then? The air around me seemed to freeze. My chest tightened, as if someone had reached inside and wrapped a cold hand around my lungs. A slow, dull roar began in my ears. My fingers hovered over the screen, stiff and pale, before I typed a single word. Okay. That was it. Just that. But behind that one word was a dam of heartbreak. Years of quiet giving, of soft forgiveness. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't follow it up with a smiley face or an "I understand." I sat there staring at the screen, the blue bubble of my response glowing back at me like some ghostly echo. My mind screamed the words I didn't send. So I was good enough to buy you a house, but not good enough to sit beside you at dinner? Not good enough to ride your damn cruise ship? They hadn't even called. Not even a voice to carry this betrayal. Just a message. Clean. Easy. A few moments later, the screen lit up again. This time, it was from Emily. I hope you understand. It's just simpler this way. Simpler. Of course. It's always simpler when you've already taken what you needed. Simpler when the person who gave you everything is conveniently kept out of the picture. I looked around my kitchen, the same space where I had once hosted holidays, birthdays, and late-night cocoa sessions when Matthew was a little boy. The curtains? I sewed them myself. The oak chairs? Sanded and refinished by hand one summer when I couldn't afford new ones. So much of this house, this life, had been built with the belief that I was building something for us, for our family, and now I was no longer part of it. The silence in the room pressed down on me. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that hums in your ears like a warning. I walked over to the framed photos on the wall. Cancun, Disney, the cabin in Vermont. Smiles. All of them. Smiles I had funded, arranged, orchestrated. Memories I thought belonged to us all. And then I thought about the house I bought for them. No mortgage, no debt, every penny from my savings. I remembered Emily crying when I handed her the keys, saying, "You'll always have a room here, Olivia." Always. Always, apparently, had an expiration date. I remembered the late nights painting their bedroom walls lavender, her favorite color. I had stayed late after work, bent over furniture, building shelves, hanging curtains, organizing pantries while they were too busy to help. I had excused their distance, their coldness, their lack of visits as young people being busy. I had swallowed the discomfort, because mothers do that. That morning, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just broke. And through that fracture, something else began to rise, not anger, not yet, but a quiet kind of clarity. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that decides. I picked up my phone and called the only person I could still trust. Martha. She answered on the second ring. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "I'm on my way." Oh, that's what real friends do. They don't need explanations. They hear your silence and fill in the blanks. When she walked in and saw my face, she didn't hug me right away. She just looked me in the eye and said, "Tell me." I slid the phone across the table. She read the messages. Her mouth tightened, and her eyes dimmed. But she didn't gasp. She didn't ask if I was sure. Instead, she said softly, "They've been planning this, Liv. I wanted to argue, to tell her no, it was just Emily. That Matthew, my sweet boy, would never do this. But my voice came out smaller than I wanted. Maybe she got into his head. Martha placed her hand over mine. No, Olivia. You raised a good boy, but you also raised a boy who never had to struggle, who never had to learn to fight for anything because you always gave him everything. And Emily? She saw that. She molded it. I looked at my friend and saw something reflected in her eyes that terrified me. Pity. But not for them. For me. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. I remember the day I signed the house over to them like it happened yesterday. It was spring, early April. The cherry tree in my front yard was in full bloom, its pink blossoms dancing in the breeze like confetti. Matthew stood on the porch with a smile that reminded me of when he was 8 and begged me for a puppy. Emily stood beside him, holding a manila folder and a fancy pen she probably bought just for that moment. Mom, he said, this means so much to us. A real home to raise our family someday. You're giving us a head start no one else could. Emily chimed in quickly, her tone dripping with sincerity. It'll always be your home too, Olivia. We want you to feel like you're part of everything. That sentence, it felt warm then, like a promise wrapped in a hug. But now, looking back, it sounds like a script, practiced, meant to comfort me just enough to blind me. I signed the documents in my own kitchen, at the same table where I used to help Matthew with his math homework. The notary was a friend of Emily's sleek blazer, sharp heels, cold smile. She barely made eye contact as she flipped the pages for me to initial. Emily kept offering me tea, chatting away about countertop renovations and garden plans. It all moved so fast. After they left that day, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It felt like something had shifted, not just in the paperwork, but in the walls themselves. I told myself I was overthinking, that this was what love looked like in action. Sacrifice. I kept telling myself that for weeks. At first, they called often. Emily would invite me over to my old house for Sunday dinners. She'd text photos of the garden I planted, now with new lawn furniture and a modern fire pit. See how cozy it's becoming? She'd write. We're making it even better for everyone. Everyone. But little things started to change. Subtle things. One Sunday, I arrived for dinner, and the door was locked. I rang the bell 3 times before Emily finally answered. She looked surprised to see me. Oh, she said, glancing back inside. I thought Matthew told you we moved it to next week. We're having a couple's night. I laughed it off. Drove home alone. Told myself it was a simple mix-up. But the mix-ups piled up. The spare key I used to have? Gone from the flower pot where I kept it for decades. When I asked, Emily told me sweetly, "Oh, we just thought it'd be safer not to leave keys around. You understand, right?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then came the cruise invite. Or rather, the lack of one. It arrived not as a phone call, but a text, 3 lines that would reshape my life. Hey, Mom. Just a heads up, we're heading on the family cruise next week. Emily thought it'd be best to keep it just us this year. Hope you understand. Love. M. I remember staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. So many words bubbled up inside me. Questions, anger, grief. But all I wrote back was, okay. I never realized how much pain could fit inside one word. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my apartment in the dark, running my fingers along furniture I had once picked with Matthew in mind. The handmade quilt on my couch, the photograph of us from Disneyland in 2097, when he rode the teacups so many times he threw up pink cotton candy on my shoes. I looked at all of it and thought, when did I stop being his family? Martha was the first person I told. She showed up the next morning, just like she always had no judgment, no questions. She sat with me as I explained the cruise, the silence, the house. Her face grew tighter with every word. They've been planning this, Liv, she said firmly. This isn't about vacations. It's about control. You gave them a gift, and now they're acting like it was a transaction, like it came with ownership of you. I wanted to argue, to say that wasn't fair, that Matthew was a good boy. that Emily just didn't know better. But the words didn't come, because somewhere, deep down, I already knew she was right. The next day, I checked my bank accounts. I hadn't done that in months. Emily had set up the auto payments. She said she'd streamline everything. You shouldn't have to deal with that in retirement, Olivia. But when I finally logged in, my heart dropped. Multiple transfers, small amounts, repeated monthly, labeled home repair, security upgrade, emergency expenses. I hadn't authorized any of them. And worse, the linked card for those transfers? Emily's? I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. My tea had gone cold beside me. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just a missed cruise or a cold dinner table anymore. It was theft. And the worst part? Matthew had to know, or at least suspect, and he didn't stop her. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The sunlight streamed through the window, touching the edge of a family portrait still hanging on the wall. I got up and took it down, not angrily, just quietly. I put it in a drawer. That night, I called Mr. Dalton, my attorney. I told him I wanted to review the house deed, the financial access Emily had, the power of attorney documents I vaguely remembered signing. Just in case, I told him. But it wasn't just in case anymore. I was preparing for battle. By the end of the week, I had a private investigator. I had signed paperwork to freeze joint accounts. I had started the process to reverse the house gift. The Olivia they knew, the quiet, gentle mother who gave without question, was gone. In her place was someone new. Not bitter, not angry, just awake. The changes in the house didn't begin with anything dramatic. It was the little things, subtle shifts that would seem harmless to an outsider. A brighter light bulb replaced in the hallway, too bright, too harsh, and I hadn't asked for it. The flower pots I had carefully planted along the windowsill suddenly disappeared one morning, replaced with sterile glass vases. Minimalist, Emily would call it. But the real chill came one night in early October. I couldn't sleep. The autumn wind crept through the cracks of the old windows. I got up, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and padded softly downstairs. I thought I'd turn on the television, maybe catch the late news. But halfway down the stairs, I froze. There was a noise. Not the usual creaks of an old house, or the fridge humming. It was deliberate. A soft, metallic clink, like a door opening. Then, a quiet giggle. Not mine, not familiar. I held my breath. I moved slowly down the hallway. The light was on in my office. The door slightly ajar. I stepped quietly, every part of me tensed. And then I heard her voice. "Leave that one, she might notice if it's gone." Emily. Not a stranger. Not a burglar. Emily. In my home. In the middle of the night. Without calling. Without knocking. I pushed the door open. She jumped, holding a stack of documents she had pulled from my file cabinet. "Emily?" My voice was sharper than I expected. "What are you doing here?" She laughed. That rehearsed, sugary laugh she always used when she was caught. "Oh my goodness, Olivia, I didn't mean to startle you. I just remembered some paperwork I needed for our taxes. Didn't want to bother you. Thought I'd just grab it quickly." She smiled like it was the most normal thing in the world. I looked at the USB drive hanging from my computer, the papers in her hands, the file cabinet left open. I stepped into the room, pulled the USB from the computer, and placed it gently on the desk. "If you need something from this house," I said coldly, "you call first. No more surprise visits." Her smile twitched, just for a second. Then she nodded, scooping up her things and leaving without another word. She was so used to moving across boundaries because I never enforced them. But that changed that night. The next morning, I called Martha, my oldest friend. I told her everything. About the midnight visit. About the USB. About the way Emily had rummaged through my life like it belonged to her. Martha was quiet for a long time. "Liv," she finally said, "you need to check every document tied to your name, property deeds, bank accounts, insurance, everything. And you need to change the locks." I didn't argue. That afternoon, I did exactly that. A locksmith came. I had every lock replaced. Then I scheduled an appointment for security cameras. I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own home. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. A few days later, I walked into the local branch of my bank, the same one I'd used since I was a school teacher. I asked to print statements from the last 3 months. The young woman at the counter didn't ask questions. She smiled, tapped a few keys, and handed me a thick stack of papers. I sat down in the corner with my reading glasses and began flipping through the pages. And my heart sank. Dozens of small transfers, $50 here, $120 there. $300 were marked as household expenses, grocery reimbursements, or caregiver allowance. Some were routed directly to a card registered under the name Emily Gardner. I had never authorized a secondary card. My hands went cold. It wasn't about the money. It was the betrayal. They had started this long before the cruise. Quietly, a little at a time, like a slow bleed. That night, I opened my home file safe. I pulled out the original deed to the house, the one my late husband and I had saved for over 20 years to pay off. I reviewed every paper with a magnifying glass, and then I saw it. My signature, on a durable power of attorney, dated last spring. I remembered vaguely lying in a hospital bed after slipping in the bathroom. Emily came in with a smile, papers in hand. "Just something to make things easier while you're resting," she said. I didn't read. I signed. And now she had access to everything. The following day, I made an appointment with Dalton, my husband's old attorney, a kind man with a slow voice and sharp eyes. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered he handled our original property filings. I brought it all: bank statements, a copy of the POA, photos of transactions, even the receipt for the USB I found in my computer. Dalton read through every page, carefully. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Mrs. Gardner," he said, "this isn't just a family issue anymore. This could constitute financial elder abuse, and possibly fraud." I kept my voice steady. "I don't want to press charges yet. I just want to protect myself. I want my house back, my name back, my life back." He nodded. "Then we start with revoking the POA, filing for reversal of the property deed, freezing financial access. It's going to take time and strength, but I'll guide you through it. Just be prepared. This might get messy." I looked him in the eyes. "I'm already in the mess, Mr. Dalton. I'm just trying to get out." That evening, I stood by the same living room window I used to sit by every Sunday afternoon. The same window where I embroidered handkerchiefs, where I watched little Matthew playing in the yard, where I once believed love meant sacrifice. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not the mother who smiled through guilt. Not the widow who signed anything handed to her. Not the woman who needed to be needed. I was Olivia Gardner, and I had finally remembered what that meant. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. I hadn't planned on returning to the house. Not after everything. Not after watching them unravel on that driveway, grasping at papers and excuses. But sometimes, closure doesn't come with silence, it needs to be looked in the eye. 3 days had passed since their return from the cruise. 3 quiet, undisturbed days in my new apartment. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the hallways. I'd bought a modest little orchid that now sat on my kitchen windowsill. Every time I watered it, I reminded myself, this is mine. Every leaf, every breath of space mine. Still, something tugged at me. The house, the old house, the place where I had raised my son, painted his bedroom walls, wrapped Christmas gifts with trembling fingers, hoping he'd love them. The place where Emily had smiled that syrupy smile and thanked me with eyes already calculating. I hadn't stepped inside since the sale finalized, but today I needed to. Not for them, not out of nostalgia. For me? I called the realtor. The young couple who bought it had been gracious, surprisingly so. When they heard I had lived there for years, they offered to let me come by before renovations began. Just a few minutes, just to say goodbye. The air felt heavier as I drove down that familiar street. Every mailbox, every picket fence reminded me of school drop-offs, block parties, quiet walks with Richard before his illness. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer I got. And then there it was. The house. No longer mine, but still filled with ghosts of my time. I parked a little way down, took a breath, and stepped out. The grass had grown slightly taller since I'd last seen it, the flower beds a little overgrown, but it was still beautiful, familiar. The new owners were waiting at the door, smiles kind and warm. They looked to be in their early 30s, freshly married, a hopeful glint in their eyes. The wife Jenna offered me tea, but I declined politely. I wasn't here to chat. I walked slowly through the front door. The scent hit me first, lavender, wood polish, and a faint trace of Emily's vanilla candles. I had bought those too, once upon a time, to make the house feel more like home for her. I remember her words exactly. I moved through each room quietly, like I was walking through a museum of my own making. The master bedroom now stripped of their possessions. The living room emptied out, but still echoing with old conversations. I stood in the corner where Matthew used to sit with his Lego sets. I remembered every cut on his little fingers, every time he ran to me when the pieces didn't fit right. I miss the boy, I whispered to the room. But the man he became, I don't recognize him. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. Each door held a memory, some warm, some bitter, some heavy as stone. I stopped in the kitchen last. The sunlight still slanted through the windows the same way. The counters were clean. The curtains I'd sewn were gone. This was the heart of the house. The place I had fed them, comforted them, handed over keys and trust and pieces of myself. I ran a finger along the edge of the sink and found a scratch. A small groove I'd forgotten was there. I had dropped a pan that day, laughing too hard at a joke Richard made. A memory, honest and real. I stayed for a few more minutes, soaking it in. Not the pain, not the betrayal, just the reality. Then I nodded to Jenna and her husband, thanked them quietly, and stepped back out into the sun. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I drove away slowly, one last glance in the rearview mirror. The house got smaller, then disappeared altogether. Back in my apartment, I sat by the window and pulled out a letter I had started writing weeks ago. It was addressed to Matthew, but it wasn't a plea, not a guilt trip, not even a demand for apology. It was a goodbye. Dear Matthew, I was your mother. I gave you everything I knew how to give. Love, shelter, opportunity. I gave you my time, my money, my strength. I gave you the house where you grew up, and then I gave you another one, hoping you'd build your own version of what I tried to give you. I thought if I gave enough, I'd be seen. Not as a bank, not as an obstacle, but as a person. You saw me when it was convenient. You thanked me when it helped your image. You called me mom when it softened your wife's schemes. But love without respect isn't love. Emily didn't ruin you. I see that now. You let her guide you, but the choices were always yours. You let her erase me. You watched her twist documents, reroute my finances, and smiled while it happened. I don't hate you. I'm simply done bleeding for people who keep sharpening the knives. This isn't revenge. It's clarity. You lost access to my home, my money, my accounts, yes. But the real loss? You lost a mother who still wanted to believe in you. If there's anything left in you that remembers who I was, who I tried to be, maybe you'll find your own version of redemption. But it won't be through me. Olivia. I folded the letter gently and placed it in a drawer. I wouldn't send it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was enough that I had written it. Enough that I had found the words. Later that evening, I received another text from Matthew. Another long, rambling apology. This time, I didn't even open it. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat by the orchid, and listened to the wind outside. This was peace. Not perfect, not without scars, but peace. And I had built at every corner of it with the same hands that once held a broken family together. But this time, I was holding myself. I found the notebook in a box I hadn't touched in years. It was buried beneath layers of old tax returns, faded greeting cards, and warranty booklets for appliances I didn't own anymore. I wasn't looking for it, but that day, I was organizing, sorting, purging, making space. When I lifted the flap and saw the edge of its worn blue cover, I froze. The spine was cracked from use, the corners curled like leaves in late autumn. I remembered it instantly. Richard's notebook. He used to scribble in it late at night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and his reading glasses halfway down his nose. Sometimes it was lists repairs we needed, books he wanted to read, places we might visit someday. Sometimes it was little thoughts, memories, reminders to himself. And once, I remember, he told me, "If anything ever happens, you'll find what matters in here." But when he passed, I couldn't bring myself to read it. I packed it away in the grief haze, the fog that wraps around you when the person you've spent your life with suddenly isn't there anymore. That day, sitting cross-legged on my apartment floor with the sunlight slanting in through the window, I finally opened it. The first few pages were familiar, his careful handwriting, neat block letters, grocery lists, notes about the car, birthdays of old friends long gone. Then came a page with a heading that stopped me cold. "For Olivia, if I'm not around." My breath caught. The words that followed weren't long, weren't flowery. Just Richard, direct, practical, and kind. "If I'm gone before you, don't let guilt be your anchor. You were always more than enough, more than generous. If Matthew ever forgets that, remind him. And if he ever hurts you, protect yourself. You don't owe anyone your silence." My hands trembled, but not from pain, from something else. Recognition. He knew. Even then, long before Emily sharpened her smile into a weapon, even before Matthew began withdrawing not just from my bank account, but from my life, Richard saw it. And he wanted me to remember who I was. I turned a few more pages. A recipe clipped from a newspaper. A sketch of the backyard he wanted to redo. And on the very last page, dated just a few weeks before he passed, was a single line. "Olivia will be okay. She just has to remember she was never weak." I set the notebook on my lap, and the tears came quiet, slow, no heaving sobs. Not grief exactly, not loss. Release. He had trusted me to survive. That night, I left the notebook open on the coffee table. As I brewed chamomile tea, I caught myself humming the tune Richard used to play on the old radio on Saturday mornings. The same one we danced to barefoot in the kitchen when Matthew was just a toddler. So much had been taken from me, but I still had that. The next morning, I woke up with a new clarity. I wasn't finished reclaiming my life, not yet. There was still one last thread to cut. The lawyer had sent me the final draft of my updated will 2 days ago. I hadn't signed it. Not because I was uncertain, just because I hadn't known where to begin. But now, as I sat at my small dining table, Richard's notebook beside me, I pulled out my pen. I crossed out the old lines, the ones that said, "To my son, Matthew," and "To his wife, Emily." Oh, and I wrote new ones. "To the community garden I volunteered at years ago, where little hands once pulled carrots from the dirt like buried treasure. To the scholarship fund in Richard's name at the local library. To Jenna and her husband, the young couple who now lived in my old home because they offered kindness without asking for anything in return. And finally, a small note at the bottom. To anyone who ever felt invisible in their own family, you matter. This life is still yours." I signed my name. That afternoon, I walked to the park. The same park with the old oak tree where Richard and I used to sit. The bench had a new coat of paint, but the tree was the same wide, welcoming, whispering in the breeze. I sat there for a while, watching ducks waddle near the edge of the pond, children tossing breadcrumbs, couples strolling by. I had been so afraid, once, of being alone. But alone, I had rebuilt. Alone, I had made peace. Alone, I had found strength. And that kind of alone wasn't lonely. I pulled the notebook from my bag and opened to the last page again. My thumb brushed over Richard's words. "Olivia will be okay." I smiled softly to myself, then turned the page over, and with my own pen, I wrote underneath it, "She is." It had been nearly 3 weeks since I reclaimed everything. The house was sold, the accounts locked, and the silence from Matthew and Emily had become deafening. After that last message from "Matthew, please, can we talk?" I hadn't replied. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I was finally learning the value of saying nothing at all. But then came the letter. It arrived on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, tucked inside a pale blue envelope with no return address. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another piece of junk mail or some attempt at recontact. But something about the handwriting familiar, hesitant, made me pause. Inside was a single note. Mom, we know you've been hurt. We never intended things to spiral this way. We're having a small dinner next Saturday to talk. Just us. No tricks, no expectations. Just family. Please come, Matthew. Just family. The words felt heavy, almost mocking. Just months ago, just family, meant excluding me from a cruise I helped them afford. Now, it was supposed to be some kind of olive branch? I set the letter on the counter, letting it sit in full view for the next few days. I didn't touch it, didn't speak about it, didn't even let myself consider attending. But it hovered there in my kitchen like a ghost, daring me to confront a part of myself I wasn't sure I was ready to face. That Saturday, I found myself standing in front of my closet longer than usual, not because I didn't know what to wear, but because I couldn't decide what kind of woman I wanted to be that night. A mother? A survivor? A witness? Eventually, I settled on something simple, dark slacks. A soft blouse. A cardigan my late husband once loved on me. Not too formal, not too casual, just enough armor to feel like I wasn't walking into a trap unprotected. Their house, once my gift, now a stranger's territory, looked the same from the outside. Trimmed hedges, warm porch light, two familiar cars in the driveway. But to me, the bricks looked colder, the air thinner. I knocked once and waited. Emily opened the door. Her smile was tight, cautious. Olivia, you look well. I said nothing. She stepped aside to let me in, and the warmth of the home hit me like a wave of memories and mistakes. The hallway rug, I had bought that. The side table near the stairs, I'd painted it myself in soft cream tones to match Emily's taste. And yet now it all looked different, foreign, like a museum of manipulated kindness. Matthew came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, Mom. His voice cracked slightly, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. Dinner's almost ready, he added. I followed them into the dining room. The table was set for 3. Candlelight flickered gently in a glass holder I had once gifted Emily for her birthday. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. I sat down silently. Emily brought out the food, all smiles, performing hospitality as if this were any other Saturday family dinner. She poured me wine I didn't ask for and placed the bread basket near me like a peace offering. I finally spoke. What is this, really? Matthew exchanged a look with Emily before answering. It's just dinner, Mom. We wanted to clear the air. I tilted my head slightly. Which air exactly? The air you filled with lies? Or the one you used to forge documents behind my back? The room went still. Emily's smile faltered. We made mistakes, she said softly. I won't deny that. Mistakes? I repeated, voice low. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. You orchestrated theft, Emily. I didn't mean... You did mean... I interrupted, sharper now. You meant to control. You meant to isolate. You meant to take everything without ever asking yourself who I was beyond what I gave you. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. We were scared. About money. The future. Emily she thought it was best to simplify things. To simplify me out of my own life? He flinched. Silence again. I took a slow sip of the wine and placed the glass back down. You didn't invite me here to apologize. You invited me because you think there's still something left to salvage. Matthew looked down at his plate. I miss you, he said quietly. I miss how things used to be. I almost laughed. You miss the woman who would babysit your dog last minute, who repainted your bedroom, who paid off your loans. That woman's gone, Matthew. Emily folded her hands. Olivia, we're not here to fight. We wanted to ask if you'd be willing to reconsider some things. The house. It was a lot to lose. The sale came as a shock. There it is, I said. There's the real reason. Oh? Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. I was your safety net, I continued. Your backup plan. And when I finally cut the cord, you realized too late that you never bothered to build your own parachute. Matthew spoke up. We were wrong, I know that. But we're still your family. I stared at him for a long moment. You were my family, I said. Now? You're people I used to know." The words landed like stone. Emily's eyes watered. Matthew looked gutted. I stood up slowly, folding my napkin and setting it on the plate. "I didn't come here to eat," I said. "I came to look you both in the eye and see if there was any trace of the people I once loved." I looked at Emily. "I don't see her." Then at Matthew. "But maybe I still see him." His eyes flickered. "Hope? Regret?" I wasn't sure. "I'm not promising anything," I added. "I'm not giving anything. But I'll say this, healing takes honesty. And for the first time in years, I'm finally being honest with myself." I walked toward the door, pausing only once. "You know where to find me," I said. "But this time, you come to me with truth, not paperwork." And then I left. The night air greeted me like an old friend as I stepped off their porch and into the dark, cool street. Behind me, the house stood still, caught in a moment it couldn't control. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. I didn't look back at the house as I walked away. The door had shut. The words had been said. And the past, twisted and painful, was finally where it belonged. Behind me. The days after that dinner unfolded with a new kind of quiet. There were no desperate calls, no panicked texts, just the early sound of birds outside my window, the soft click of the kettle as it boiled, and the gentle turning of pages in a book I'd meant to read years ago. I started putting my life back together, not as a betrayed mother, but as a woman reclaiming her power. I signed up to volunteer at the local library, reading to seniors. I took morning walks through the neighborhood, under the vibrant red maples lining the streets I once drove down to pick up my grandson from preschool. But peace is never complete. One morning, as I returned from my usual walk, I saw a letter tucked under my door. Thick, formal, the seal of a law office I didn't recognize. I knew. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the envelope with Richard's old letter opener still tucked in the drawer where he'd left it. Inside was a letter. "Dear Mrs. Olivia Gardner, I represent your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Emily Gardner, regarding matters surrounding the recent transfer of property ownership and certain allegations of financial misconduct. My client strongly disputes aspects of the narrative presented and seeks to resolve the situation through civil mediation to avoid prolonged legal proceedings. We respectfully request a joint mediation session, to be attended by legal representatives from both sides, to discuss a resolution in good faith. Should we not receive a response by the 12th of next month, we will proceed with next steps as outlined by applicable law." I placed the letter on the table and closed my eyes, steadying my breath. Mediation? They still didn't understand. I called Mr. Dalton immediately. He arrived within the hour, briefcase in hand, sharp-eyed as always. "Nothing to worry about," he said after reading it. "They're panicking. If they thought they could win, they wouldn't be asking for mediation." I nodded slowly. "Do we have to respond?" "We should," he said, "but only to shut the door firmly." I looked out the window. Kids were playing in the sunshine, kicking a ball down the sidewalk. "Write it," I said, "but I'll sign it myself." 2 days later, we sent my response. "To Mrs. Emily Gardner, I received your lawyer's letter. I should be surprised, but I'm not. I know who you are far better than you think. You don't want peace. You want control of the story. But I'm no longer the mother-in-law who signs documents in silence. I don't want a false sense of harmony. I want truth. I want justice. I want freedom. We will not speak again. Any future communication must go through legal counsel. Olivia Gardner." It was the firmest letter I'd ever written, and the easiest to sign. I thought it might end there. But life rarely closes chapters as neatly as novels do. 1 week later, I received a call from a number I didn't know. "This is Michelle," the woman said, hesitating. "Emily's ex-sister-in-law. I know this might seem strange, but I thought you should know Emily's done this before she even married your son." I froze. "She forged my father's signature to sell his car," Michelle continued. "When we found out, she blamed it on me. Turned the whole family against me. I never said anything, until someone forwarded me a local article about the house." "Article?" I asked. "Yes. It was a short legal notice in the local paper. Your name and Matthew's were mentioned. After we hung up, I searched for the piece. Short, cold, but factual. Disputed property ownership resolved in Gardner family. Olivia Gardner, 68, restored full title to her former home following allegations of financial misconduct by family members. I set the phone down and stared into space. I didn't feel shame or satisfaction, just relief. The truth had left the walls of my home. That evening, I walked around the lake, as usual. Another older woman, Denise, a retired nurse, often walked with me. Tonight, she joined me again. "You look lighter these days, Olivia," she said with a kind smile. I returned it. "I feel alive again." "Because you got away from them?" I shook my head. "Because I stopped letting them define me." We sat on an old bench overlooking the water. The moon shimmered across the lake like silver threads on velvet. I pulled out the old locket from my coat pocket, the one Richard gave me after our 30th anniversary. I opened it and looked at the faded photo inside. Richard holding a young Matthew in his arms. Me in the background, smiling. "He'd be proud," I whispered. Denise didn't ask who. She just gently squeezed my hand, and in that stillness I knew I had made it through. Not by winning a war, but by walking away from it whole. And finally, unafraid to be myself, even if that meant being alone. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. I spent the whole day after that dinner invitation turning the words over and over in my head like smooth stones in my palm. "You should come, Mom. It'll be good to have the whole family together again." Family. That word had lost so much of its weight. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, it had simply shifted, become something brittle and decorative like the porcelain fruit bowl Emily always kept at the center of her dining table. Polished, lovely, but hollow. I told them I'd think about it. And I did. All day. I wandered from room to room in my modest apartment, running my fingers along the edges of picture frames, each one capturing a life I no longer lived. Matthew as a baby. Me and Robert on our 25th anniversary cruise. A Christmas morning where everyone looked happy, even if they hadn't been. I made a cup of tea, let it go cold, made another, still cold. I wasn't afraid of going. I was afraid of who I might become if I did. But then, around 5 p.m., as the sunlight turned golden on the hardwood floors, something inside me shifted. I set my cup down this time, still warm, and stood in front of the mirror by the door. I looked at myself, at the woman who'd finally said no, the one who had taken her name back from a bank account, the one who'd stopped waiting for affection to be earned through sacrifice. I decided I'd go, not to make peace, not to fall for old patterns again. I'd go to speak, to be heard. Maybe for the first time. Emily opened the door before I even knocked. She smiled like she always did, wide, bright, and performative. "Olivia, you made it," she chirped, stepping aside. I stepped in. The air smelled of rosemary and butter. Familiar, but too perfect, like it was trying to impress. Matthew was setting the table. When he saw me, he paused, then gave me a sheepish smile. "Hey, Mom. Glad you came." I nodded politely. "Dinner smells lovely." We sat down not long after. The table was set immaculately, of course it was. Cloth napkins, place cards, a centerpiece of fresh-cut flowers that didn't quite mask the tension under the surface. Emily served roast chicken, garlic potatoes, and steamed green beans. Every dish I'd once made for Matthew when he was a boy. She had replicated the menu almost too precisely, a performance of familiarity. We made small talk. They asked about my health, my new apartment, the weather. I answered in calm, clipped sentences. I watched the way Emily's eyes flicked toward Matthew constantly, as if checking if he approved of her tone, her phrasing. I noticed the way Matthew couldn't meet my gaze for longer than a second. Finally, as we cleared the plates, Emily sat down with a glass of wine in hand and gave me that practiced look, the one she used when she was about to bring something up gently. "Olivia," she began, "I know things have been difficult, but I'm really glad we're sitting down like this again. We're still family, and family should stick together, right?" I folded my napkin slowly, then placed it on the table. "You're right. Family should stick together. That's why it's so painful when they don't." Emily's smile faltered, but she kept going. "Well, I'm just hoping we can move forward. Start fresh." I tilted my head. Emily, do you know how many fresh starts I've given the two of you? More than you've ever noticed. Or maybe you noticed. You just didn't care. And Matthew shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we said we were sorry. I looked at him, really looked. Matthew, do you even know what you're sorry for? Silence. I'm not here tonight to pretend everything's fine, I said. I'm not here to be the mother who fixes everything with a smile and a checkbook. I'm here because I needed you to see the woman you pushed too far. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. We've already been through this, haven't we? I thought this dinner was about healing. Healing only happens when the wound is acknowledged, I replied. And for years, I handed over my time, my money, my love, not because I expected repayment, but because I believed you cared. And when I needed care, you left me out in the cold. Literally. Matthew looked down at his plate. You excluded me from your lives the moment I stopped being convenient, I said. The moment I started asking questions. Emily's voice took on that soft condescension again. Olivia, you're taking things the wrong way. We were just trying to manage things. We thought we were helping. No, I said, my voice sharp now. You were helping yourselves. You weren't managing anything but control. And the worst part is, I paused, my voice trembling just slightly. You did it while still calling me Mom, as if that word was enough to hide the betrayal. Matthew finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I didn't know how deep it had gone. I thought Emily had it under control. That's the thing, I said. You didn't want to know, because knowing would mean doing something, and that would have been inconvenient. The room was quiet. No silverware clinking, no background music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sharp ache of truth. I stood up. I'm not staying for dessert, I said. I didn't come for cake. I came because I needed to say this. You gambled with my love, and you lost. And I hope someday, when you look at each other and wonder why things feel so quiet, so empty, it's not because you lost a mother. It's because you gave her up. Emily looked stunned. Matthew looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. And me? I felt taller, straighter, whole. As I reached the door, I turned once more. I do hope you both find peace someday, I said. But I won't be the one paying for it anymore. I walked into the night air, cool and honest. The sky was full of stars, and for the first time in a long while, I looked up at them not with longing, but with gratitude. I had found my voice at last. And this time, I wasn't giving it back. It was the next morning, and the sunlight streamed through my modest kitchen window, catching in the rim of my teacup. The steam curled up like a gentle spirit, warm and unspoken. The apartment was still, peaceful. It had been only a few days since the dinner, since I stood up at that table and spoke words that had lived in my chest for too many years, buried beneath layers of sacrifice, guilt, and maternal instinct. I hadn't heard from Matthew since. Not a call, not a message, not even a half-hearted apology from Emily. The silence that followed was heavy, but not unbearable. It was different now. It wasn't the silence of dismissal or isolation. It was the silence of clarity, of boundaries. I took another sip of my tea and reached for the envelope that had been sitting at the edge of the table since yesterday, a thick manila packet from my attorney, Mr. Dalton. On the front, in tidy handwriting, were 2 words: final draft. The will. Not just any will, but a complete overhaul of the one I'd written years ago, back when I still thought love could be secured with provisions and property, back when I still believed that giving enough would keep me needed. I opened the envelope slowly, carefully. Paper rustled like old leaves, and inside was a stack of documents. Legal language, yes, but beneath it all was something far more personal. This was my voice, my choice, my declaration of who I truly wanted to protect when I was gone. I flipped to the second page. The line that used to read, Matthew Gardner and spouse Emily Gardner, was now blank. Struck through. Replaced by 3 new names, people who had stood by me when there was nothing left to take. Not family by blood, but by kindness. My longtime neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael, who brought me soup when I had the flu last winter. The nurse from my physical therapy clinic who always remembered my name. And one young woman, a single mother named Tara, who had been my housekeeper long ago, and whom I had once helped through a difficult divorce. She had never forgotten. None of them had asked for anything. None of them expected a dime. That, I realized, was exactly why I wanted to give them something. My pen hovered over the last page where my signature would go. The act itself would only take a moment. But the decision? That had taken a lifetime. And suddenly, I remembered something Robert had said to me once, many years ago, as we lay in bed on a rainy Sunday morning. "You can't control who loves you, Liv," he whispered, his hand resting on mine. "But you can choose who you love out loud." Out loud. That's what this will was. Not revenge, not punishment. Love. Spoken clearly. I signed the page. Is of it. That afternoon, I met Mr. Dalton at his office. He didn't ask questions. He saw the signed pages and only nodded with approval. "This is final," he said gently, sliding the folder back into its envelope. "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "No regrets?" I looked at him, holding his gaze. Only that I waited so long to see what was always in front of me. He smiled, a rare, kind smile that spoke more than words. "You've done something many people never do. You've taken back your story." On the way home, I stopped by the small park I used to walk in with Robert. The oak tree was still there, rooted and wide-armed, the same as ever. I sat on the old bench, listening to the breeze. Children laughed in the distance, and birds chattered overhead. I closed my eyes and let the sounds fill me. Not the sound of Emily's clinking wine glass or Matthew's half-hearted excuses, but the real, living world. The world I still belong to. When I got back to the apartment, there was a message on my voicemail. "Hi, Mom. It's Matthew." A pause. Then softer. "I heard you changed the will." Of course he had. I don't understand. After everything, you're just going to cut me out? You're still my mom." He sighed. "I know I messed up. I know, Emily. Took things too far. But that's not me. Not really. Can we talk? Please?" I sat in silence, staring at the phone. There was a time I would have rushed to call him back, to fix what I could, to preserve the family name like an old photograph I was afraid to lose. But the photo was already faded, and the people in it had already walked away. I deleted the message. Vo. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter from Tara, one of the names in my new will. It was simple. "Dear Mrs. Gardner, I don't know what to say. I never expected anything from you. I never forgot how you helped me. You believed in me when no one else did. You helped me keep my son. You gave me work when I had none. What you're doing now, it means more than I can say. With love and gratitude, Tara." I folded the letter and held it to my chest. And I cried. Not the kind of tears I used to cry, tears of confusion or loss or loneliness, but tears of recognition. This was family. Not the kind that shares your blood, but the kind that shares your burdens. This was my legacy. Not the house, not the money, but the people who knew my name and remembered my kindness. That evening, I pulled down an old photo album from the top shelf. One I hadn't opened in years. I flipped through the pages, pictures of young Matthew, of Robert, of Christmas mornings and family vacations. Then I turned to the last few pages. Blank. And I added something new. A picture of me, taken last week by Mrs. Carmichael's grandson, sitting on a park bench, smiling at nothing in particular, just content. I wrote under it in soft ink, "A life reclaimed." I closed the book, placed it back on the shelf, and exhaled. The will had been signed. The story had turned. And this time, it was mine. It had been nearly 3 weeks since I signed the new will. 3 weeks since I had last heard Matthew's voice stumbling, tentative, laced with the regret of someone who only mourns what's gone once it's out of reach. The days passed differently now. Slower, but sweeter. I kept to my little rituals, watering the violets on the windowsill, walking to the corner market on Tuesdays, and sitting at the park bench under the oak tree that still remembered Robert. I felt whole in a way I hadn't in years. I no longer carried the weight of hope that Matthew might call just to say, "I love you." or that Emily might surprise me with a real gesture of kindness, not one wrapped in a price tag or power grab. That hope had drained away, and with it, the ache. But then, on a rainy Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked slowly to the door. The peephole revealed a figure standing under a dark green umbrella, dripping wet, head down. Matthew. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice softer than I remembered. He looked older. Not aged, exactly, but worn. The kind of wear that comes from truths catching up with you. His coat clung to him, soaked. And for a moment, he looked like a boy, again, small, uncertain, standing at my door like he had when he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball at 10 years old. But I wasn't the same mother who rushed to shield him then. "I need to talk," he said. "Just, please." I let the silence stretch long enough to feel like a choice. Then I nodded once and stepped aside. He took a seat on the couch he used to sprawl across like it was his birthright. Now he perched on the edge, as if unsure whether he belonged. I made no offer of tea. "You look well," he said awkwardly. "I am," I replied. "What brings you here, Matthew?" He swallowed hard. I didn't come to argue. I know things went too far. I know you don't trust me right now. Maybe never again." I waited. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know everything Emily was doing. Not all of it. I saw some things, but I let it happen. I told myself you were okay with it because you didn't say no. But deep down, I think I knew you just didn't want to fight. I exhaled slowly. He wasn't wrong. I told myself it was easier for you if we handled things. Easier if you didn't have to worry. But that wasn't kindness. It was control. And it wasn't even mine. It was hers. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. "I'm sorry." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows. I walked over to the shelf and picked up the envelope Tara had mailed me, still sitting there from the week before. I held it gently, feeling its weight not in ounces, but in meaning. And I thought about what Robert would have done if he'd still been here. He would have listened, but he would not have excused. "Do you love her?" I asked. Matthew blinked. "What?" "Emily. Do you still love her?" He looked down again. "I don't know. I think I loved the idea of what we were building. But now I don't know what's real." I nodded once. Then I did something that surprised even me. I sat down beside him, not close, but not cold either. There was space between us, a space filled with years of mistakes and silence, but also a sliver of something else. "Honesty, Matthew," I said quietly. "Love means nothing without respect, and respect means nothing without boundaries. I gave you everything because I believed in who you were, but you handed that trust to someone who didn't deserve it." He nodded. A tear slid silently down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. "I'm not here to fix what's broken," I said, my voice steady. "That's not my job anymore. I spent too many years trying to make things work for everyone but myself." "I understand," he whispered. "I hope so," I replied. "Because moving forward, my life isn't something you get to manage, or assume, or borrow against." He let out a shaky breath, but didn't argue. We sat in silence for several minutes, just the two of us. No past, no photos, no promises, just presence. Then he stood up. "I won't take any more of your time," he said. "I just needed you to know I'm sorry. For real." I nodded again. "That's between you and your conscience." He hesitated at the door. Can I call you sometime?" I looked at him fully, the son I had raised, the man he had become. "If you're calling to listen, not to ask for anything," I said, "then yes." He nodded once, almost like a bow, and left. That evening, I lit a single candle on my windowsill. Not for ceremony, just for quiet. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean. I didn't know what the future held with Matthew. I didn't need to. Some wounds don't fully heal, but they do stop bleeding. And when they do, you learn how to move without flinching. I picked up my knitting needles and settled into my chair. The yarn moved through my fingers like rhythm, like memory, like calm. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled not from vindication or victory, but from peace. I woke up the next morning feeling different. Not lighter exactly, not joyful, just quiet inside. A kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. No buzzing phone, no chirpy voice asking for just a small favor. No creeping dread that today might bring another betrayal hidden in politeness. Just birdsong outside my window, the soft hum of my apartment coming to life. For once, I made coffee and sat in silence. Not out of sadness, but clarity. I had taken my life back, signed every page, closed every loophole. But the questions lingered, stubborn and unfinished. Why me? Why was it so easy for them to betray me? Why was my love something they felt entitled to twist, to steal from? I didn't want an apology, I didn't expect one. But I needed to understand. Not to forgive, just to end it. Clean. And so, I did something I never imagined I would. I got in my car and drove 2 hours to a town I hadn't visited in years, the place where Emily's mother, Florence, still lived. Florence was the only person I'd ever seen Emily show even a flicker of fear around. Not because Florence was cruel, but because she saw through people like glass. Small, sharp-eyed, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I'd met her a few times at family gatherings, and once, just once, she'd taken my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Be careful with my daughter-in-law. She was raised to get what she wants, not to earn it." When I pulled up to her little brick house, Florence was already sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, as if she'd been waiting. "Took you long enough," she said. "I figured you'd come sooner or later." I hesitated before stepping out of the car. She didn't smile, but there was something like readiness in her face, a quiet understanding. I sat down across from her on the wooden bench. My hands were still cold from the drive. She poured me tea without asking and looked at me. What did she do now? And I told her everything, from the bank accounts to the cruise, from the forged power of attorney to the house now sold to strangers. I laid it all out. Every sickening, infuriating detail. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just spoke, like I was reading the final page of a book I'd been trapped in for years. Florence listened in silence. She didn't ask questions. She just sipped her tea and let me talk. When I finished, she set her cup down. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not for her. She doesn't deserve that. But I'm sorry because I always knew she had it in her. I just hoped she'd change once she found someone who actually gave a damn." I stared down into my cup, my voice thin. I treated her like my own. I trusted her. Florence put her hand over mine, warm, wrinkled, but steady. "That was your mistake," she said gently. "You saw her as a daughter, but she never saw you as a mother. You were a resource, a position, a vault she could smile at until it opened." It hit me harder than I expected, but then she added something else, something I never saw coming. "You know where she learned that from?" I looked at her, surprised. She nodded slowly. "Me. She didn't flinch when she said it. I raised her to survive, to win. I taught her how to get what she wanted, in a world that doesn't offer women much unless they take it. But I forgot to teach her when to stop. I forgot to teach her what love really is. That's on me." My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. "I knew she'd test you," Florence said. "I just thought maybe she'd see what a good woman looks like and change course." I sat with those words, feeling them settle deep in my bones. I didn't come here to place blame, but somehow this mattered. I didn't get closure from Emily, but I got the truth. And sometimes, truth is the better ending. Florence stood up and opened the front door. "You're stronger than she'll ever be. She thinks she won because she took things, but you let go of people who didn't deserve you. That's real strength." I drove back home slowly, thinking about every word she'd said. That night, I stood in my apartment, the modest place I had chosen for myself. There were no expensive marble countertops, no fancy, soft, close cabinets, No curated Instagram-style home. But there was peace. Real peace. And nobody could take that from me again. It had been 3 days since I sat across from Florence and heard the truth. No one else had ever dared to say aloud. And I hadn't stopped thinking about her words since. You treated her like a daughter, but she never saw you as a mother. They echoed in my chest like a quiet bell. Not cruel, not bitter, just painfully, unshakably true. I didn't cry about it. I didn't rage. Instead, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I began putting things away, not out of shame or sadness, but because I was ready. Ready to clear the remnants of a life I no longer belonged to. The wedding photos. The framed pictures of birthdays and baby showers and holidays where I stood in the back, smiling, holding the camera, never fully part of the memory. I wrapped each one gently in old towels and tucked them into a cardboard box marked past. I left the box on the top shelf of my closet. Not in anger. Just closure. That afternoon, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Not out of habit, but because I wanted to. Because the chair didn't feel lonely anymore, it felt like mine. I thought of Matthew, of the boy he used to be, and I allowed myself finally to grieve him. Not the man he became, but the boy I had loved. The boy who would curl up next to me with his stuffed elephant and ask me to read Goodnight Moon 3 times in a row. The boy who used to draw pictures of our house with hearts over the windows. The boy who used to run to me like I was the safest place in the world. I whispered goodbye to him, because he was gone. And I wasn't waiting around for a version of him that would never return. Later that evening, I got an email from Dalton. The investigator had officially closed his audit. The report was done. All of it. Packaged. Neat. Tied in a bow. Dalton's message was simple. We're secure. The account transfers are finalized. The house is long gone. The protective clauses are in place. There's nothing left they can touch. Olivia, you did it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't believe him, but because the words felt final. And for the first time, final didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. I replied with just 2 words. Thank you. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill. It was something Richard used to do when he wanted to mark a fresh start. He believed in small rituals, in claiming moments with light, so I did the same. The flame flickered softly against the glass. I watched it for a while, breathing in the lavender scent and letting the quiet wrap around me like a soft shawl. The phone buzzed. Again, it was Emily. This time, she didn't text. She called. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash across it. My finger hovered over the answer button, and then I pressed decline, not out of pettiness, but because I had nothing left to say. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew it was from them. I opened it slowly at the table, heart steady. Inside were 8 handwritten pages. Matthew's handwriting. It began, Mom, I don't know where to start. It went on. A tangle of guilt and excuses, of Emily's manipulation, of his own cowardice, of how he felt trapped, out of control, swept into something bigger than he could stop. He said he didn't know how deep it had gone, that he wished he had spoken up sooner, that he missed me, that he hated what this had done to our family, that he was sorry. And for the first time, I realized how heavy the word sorry can feel when it comes too late. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. Just a soft, quiet H. He signed the letter. Your son, if you'll still have me. I folded the pages neatly and placed them in a drawer. Not to forget them, but because they didn't change anything. Love can't survive without respect, and apologies don't fix broken foundations. Sometimes, all a mother can do is protect herself. That afternoon, I took a walk. It was sunny, but not hot. The breeze was kind. The world moved on, just like it always had. Unaware of the wars fought in quiet kitchens and family rooms behind closed doors. I passed a small bookstore, one I hadn't noticed before. Something about it pulled me in. Inside, I wandered the shelves, running my fingers along the spines of paperbacks and hardcovers. A book of poetry caught my eye. I opened to a random page. The line read, "She built herself from the ruins, brick by brick, breath by breath." I smiled. Yes, yes, I had. That evening, back home, I made dinner just for myself. I played music. I laughed at an old cooking mistake I used to make that Emily once mocked. Now, it just made me feel human, alive, whole. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their explanations. I didn't even need their remorse. Because I finally had something far more valuable: peace. It started with a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. Not like the kind that demands attention, but the kind that hopes to be let in. I was in the kitchen, folding clean dish towels, when I heard it. For a moment, I thought it might be the building manager or one of the neighbors, maybe coming to return a borrowed casserole dish or ask about the community board meeting. But when I opened the door, it was Matthew. My son. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just tired. His face was drawn, his eyes puffy like he hadn't slept in days. He had his hands in his pockets, a habit from when he was a child and didn't know what to do with himself. "Hi, Mom," he said. My throat felt tight. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. I didn't say anything. "Can I come in?" There was a long silence between us. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I would speak. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, as if unsure if he belonged. And perhaps, in that moment, he didn't. The man who sat on my couch now wasn't the boy I had raised. He wasn't even the man I had once hoped he would become. He was someone else entirely, a stranger with my son's face. I didn't offer him tea. He didn't ask. We sat in silence for a while. He looked around the apartment, probably taking in the simplicity of it all. No expensive furniture, no curated art, no housewarming photos. Just me. Just what I needed. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But everything sounds small compared to what we did." I didn't respond. Not yet. He looked down at his hands. Emily left. That got my attention, though I tried not to show it. She said it was all my fault, that I was weak, that I let things get this far. He let out a sad laugh. Maybe she was right. I kept my voice even. "Why are you here, Matthew?" He blinked at the question. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to see you." I nodded slowly. "You saw me every time you signed off on another lie. Every time you let her drain what I had built. Every time you said nothing." He winced. "I know. Do you?" I asked, my tone sharp but calm. "Do you really?" He looked up, and for a split second, there was something real in his eyes. Regret? Shame? It was hard to tell. "I let you down," he said simply. "I let myself down too." I stood then, not to walk away, but to give myself space. I looked out the window, the sun low and golden across the buildings. "You didn't just let me down, Matthew. You sold me out." He didn't argue. He couldn't. I turned back to him. "You know what hurts the most?" He looked up. "It's not the money. It's not even the house. It's that you saw what she was doing and you let her." He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No excuses. I've heard enough." He nodded slowly. "I'm not here to beg," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and that I understand if you never want to see me again." I studied him. The lines on his face, the slumped posture, the broken man sitting before me. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I can't trust you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded again. He stood, ready to leave. I didn't stop him. At the door, he paused. "Mom?" "Yes? Thank you. For everything. Even now." He left, and I stood there in the quiet. This time, I didn't cry, because this time, I had nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, that was the gift I never gave myself before. The right to feel peace after the storm. I had just finished folding my laundry when the doorbell rang. It was nearly dusk, and the soft golden light was slipping through the curtains, painting everything in a calm, amber glow. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first instinct was to ignore it. But something told me to check. When I opened the door, I froze. There, Standing on the welcome mat was Emily. Her posture was stiff, her eyes bloodshot. She clutched something in her hands, an envelope, thick and slightly crumpled. She looked nothing like the smug woman who used to breeze through my house with her polished nails and perfectly curled hair. Her face was drawn, tired, smaller, somehow. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice a shadow of its usual self-assurance. I didn't move. Why? She looked down at the envelope and then back at me. I wanted to explain. Please. For a moment, I considered slamming the door. But something in me, a part that still remembered the younger, softer version of her, hesitated. I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, like someone walking into a stranger's house, which, in a way, it was now. She looked around, taking in the smaller space, the modest furnishings. I gestured for her to sit at the small dining table. She placed the envelope on the table between us. "I wrote it all down," she said, "because I figured if I tried to say it, I'd mess it up." I didn't touch the envelope. "Then don't say anything." Her lips parted, but I cut her off. "You stood on my porch and told me I'd end up alone. You said you built a life, and I destroyed it. What is there left to say?" Emily's shoulders sagged. "You're right. I deserve all of that. Probably more." "Oh." There was silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I panicked," she continued. "When the money stopped, I didn't know what to do. We were already in deep with the renovations, the credit cards. I told myself we'd fix it later, that we were just borrowing until we could pay it back." I raised an eyebrow. "But you weren't borrowing. You were stealing." Emily winced. "Yes. I trusted you. I know. And Matthew—" I stopped myself, breathing through the ache in my chest. "My son. My only child. He's ashamed," she said quietly. "He can't face you." "He faced my money just fine." She blinked rapidly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say it out loud. That I know what we did was wrong. I'm not asking for anything." "Good," I said. Another beat of silence. She pushed the envelope a little closer. "That's everything I could gather. Bank records, receipts, emails. In case you ever need more proof. I thought it might help, if things go to court." I looked at it now, not out of interest, but out of curiosity. Evidence, not apology. "And why now?" I asked. Emily's voice cracked. "Because the silence is worse than the shouting. Because we lost everything. And I can finally see why. I wanted too much. I confused control with safety. And I hurt you in the process." "You did more than hurt me." "I know." She stood slowly. "I won't bother you again." I watched her walk to the door. Just before she stepped out, she turned back one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice barely audible, "you were the best thing that ever happened to Matthew. To both of us. We just didn't see it until we destroyed it." The door closed behind her. I didn't move for a long while. My hands rested on the table, beside the envelope, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew everything I needed to know. That night, as I stood by the window, I thought about what she said, and about what she didn't say. She never asked for another chance. She didn't beg or plead. She knew the line had been crossed and that the damage couldn't be undone. And maybe that was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever get from her. The next morning, a knock on the door startled me. This time, it was Martha. She held up a bag of groceries and grinned. "You look like someone who could use banana bread." I laughed. A real one. She stepped inside like she always had, like no time had passed. As we sipped coffee at my tiny table, I told her everything. Emily's visit, the envelope, the words. Martha listened, nodding. "You don't owe them anything, Liv. Not forgiveness. Not explanations." "I know," I said, "but it still hurts." "Of course it does," she replied. "Because you cared. Because you're human. But pain doesn't mean regret. And boundaries don't mean cruelty." I looked out the window. The sun was rising. Light filtered in, warm and new. "I don't regret saving myself," I said quietly. Not anymore. Martha reached over and squeezed my hand. Then that's all that matters. Peace didn't come the way I always thought it would. It didn't arrive with an apology, a family reunion, or even some grand resolution. Number. It came slowly like morning mist lifting from the lawn. It came in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, in the comfort of clean sheets, in the knowing that no one was siphoning my life away anymore. For the first time in years, silence wasn't suffocating. It was sacred. People ask me now, do you regret it? Selling the house, cutting ties, letting go. And the truth is, I don't. I regret trusting blindly for so long. I regret thinking that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret waking up. You know, there's a verse I used to glance over in church. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I never really understood it. I used to think wisdom belonged to the loud, the clever, the assertive, and innocence. That was weakness, right? But now, sitting here with a clear head and a full heart, I get it. Wisdom doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it simply says, read the fine print. It raises an eyebrow when something feels off. It pauses before signing. It hires the right attorney. It asks one more question. And innocence? It's not about being naive. It's about refusing to let bitterness take root. It's what keeps you from becoming the very thing that hurt you. That verse didn't mean to be clever and soft at the same time. It meant, be sharp enough to see the danger. Be kind enough not to become it. That's the balance I live with now. I never set out to destroy anyone. I just decided not to be destroyed. Emily and Matthew haven't spoken to me since that day on the driveway. Not properly, anyway. A few texts. Empty words. A voicemail or two. I didn't answer. I don't need to. Some silences say more than 1,000 conversations ever could. And yes, I still love my son, in a way that doesn't require his return. I love the boy who once brought me dandelions in a cup, but I no longer try to reach the man who sold my trust for marble countertops. It's strange how heavy love can get when it's unreturned, and how light you feel when you set it down. These days, I fill my life differently. Mornings with tea and soft jazz. Afternoons tending to my little herb garden. I talk with neighbors. I listen more. I laugh without caution. And at night, I sit by the window and thank God for giving me the courage to say no. No to manipulation. No to fear disguised as family. No to being erased while still alive. I say yes to smaller things now, yes to quiet, to safety, to choices that are mine alone. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's mine. And that makes all the difference. Richard used to say, not all storms come to destroy, some come to clear the path. I never knew just how true that was until the day I walked away from the life they tried to steal. So no, this isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of remembering who I am. And finally, allowing that to be enough. Ending note. A quiet, worth keeping. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with me in the silence, for listening not to the noise of conflict, but to the voice that rose beneath it. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe your silence was mistaken for weakness. Maybe you gave until there was nothing left. But hear me now. Quiet doesn't mean surrender. Kindness doesn't mean permission. And love, real love, should never cost your self-worth. You are allowed to draw lines. You are allowed to protect the home within you. And you are allowed to do it softly, without apology. Be wise. Be gentle. Be free. Because peace, real peace, isn't something they give you. It's something you claim. And once you have it, it is a quiet worth keeping.